It's not the rate itself. It's not the concept of paying people and compensating them. It's the whole model. With razor-thin margins and everyone thinking that they can tell you how to run your business, it becomes impossible.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Matt Rothbard. Camilla Marcus is a chef, restaurateur, and founder of Bourne, a wildly progressive restaurant and products company based in Los Angeles. Camilla is one of my favorite big thinkers in food, and I so enjoyed having her in the studio to talk about some big topics of the day, including the pioneering Bourne, her career in and out of the kitchen, and how the government can help restaurants survive during these challenging times. And before we get to the interview, it's the return of Three Things, where Eliza and I discuss the exciting world of restaurants, cookbooks, a coveted New York City restaurateur memoir, and the exciting world of food as a whole. I hope you enjoy this episode. Eliza, what is up? We're back. How are you?
I'm good, Matt. I went into a deep Wikipedia hole last night. Does that ever happen to you?
Many, many times. It's usually architecture related. I just can't get enough of it.
Okay, mine was food related. Do you know who Clementine Paddleford was?
Amazing human being.
Okay, I had never heard of her before.
Yeah.
And I was doing some research for an upcoming feature that we're running on the website about hibachi, like Benihana style restaurants. Apparently, Benihana says that this writer named Clementine Paddleford is the reason the Benihana is famous. And so I set out to try to find this original review, which I did not find. But what I did find was all of these delicious tidbits about this early food writer's life, such as the fact that she was a pilot and flew her own propeller plane around the country to report on restaurants. What? I was like, I'm late to this party that I don't know about this writer who was active in New York and in the whole country from the 20s to the 60s. She also invented the term hero for a hero sub.
That's incredible. I didn't know that. That's a cool tidbit.
Well, this is Wikipedia, so you know. But apparently she said you have to be a hero to finish the whole sub. So that's how that one
a marketing genius
came about. She went on an active Navy submarine in the 60s to report on the food there. I just love this image of this woman flying herself around the country in a propeller plane to report on restaurants.
I mean, biopic.
Yeah, I want this into a movie.
Write the article.
I want a movie.
And let's get it optioned. I mean, let's just do it.
I want a movie and I want to taste propeller plane.
I think that reviewing restaurants via plane it happens today. I think that there's probably somebody who does that.
I mean, people fly across the country to go try restaurants and report about them. But people flying themselves across the country?
That's what I mean. I think people do that. I think there has got to be, and I'm not saying obviously the New York Times critics probably aren't flying themselves, but there's got to be a writer who has some kind of website, journal, something, who's reviewing restaurants, who is doing it plane by plane. Let's find that person.
Okay, we'll find them, but maybe we should talk about three things.
I think we should. How about you start?
Okay, my first thing is a delightful snack that I had yesterday. I was running errands in Chinatown. I stopped by Spongy's Cafe. Yeah. Have you been there before?
I haven't. No, tell me about it.
So I actually tried this first because Shirley was on a shoot that they had these on set and she brought one back for me. But they're Hong Kong style paper wrapped steamed sponge cakes. So light and fluffy, crispy on the outside. They do a lot of really cool flavors. I tried a curry flavor and a chocolate sprinkle flavor last week. But then yesterday I went back and I got this pandan coconut flavor that was really delicious. And I think it's just a really special New York kind of spot. The head baker, the owner, is this man named Fernando Ponce, who grew up eating Mexican-style sponge cakes. When he moved to New York, he apprenticed at Kam Heng Bakery in Chinatown, which is a legendary old-school sponge cake spot. He worked there for 30 years. Then he opened his own location. Wow. I saw him speaking 4 languages when I was in there yesterday, Cantonese, Mandarin, English, Spanish, back to back. The sponge cakes are $1.50. It's just kind of a perfect place.
And it's called Spongy?
Spongy's Cafe.
That is such a great name as well. It just says it all, and it's truly what I want right now.
Yeah, it was awesome.
And savory curry.
Sweet and savory,
That's amazing.
Yeah, and they do coffee, they do Thai tea. It's just kind of a little refuel spot.
Let's put a pin in that one. We're talking about maybe doing a Manhattan Chinatown episode.
It would be fun.
It would be fun.
What's your first thing?
My first thing is I am 97% done with the Keith McNally memoir called I Regret Almost Everything. It's been called the McGalley. this work, and getting a copy of it has been a little bit of a social media moment. I've seen it online since January, and we've been teasing it out for a very long time because it's been quite delayed. I requested an interview with Keith. Unfortunately, he is not doing any interviews outside of email interviews. The story is about his stroke that occurred in 2015, and he can't speak as well now, so he's not able to join the podcast, which is unfortunate because I really want to speak with him, but maybe we'll do an email interview. I have to tell you about this book because I really want to talk about it with somebody and I haven't done it yet.
Yeah, I haven't read it, so no big spoilers, but what's the deal?
Well, Keith McNally, just to set the table, if you don't know, he is a very, very legendary restaurateur in New York City. Him and his wife, Lynn Wagenknecht, opened the Odeon and Cafe Luxembourg and Nell's in the 70s and 80s. And really, he got, he was the top of the list for restaurateurs in New York. And really, this memoir is very interesting because I have to say, I don't know if he's a reliable narrator. I don't think anyone will know, and that's not necessarily important with a memoir. I think it's his memoir, and he gets to choose what he leaves in, what he leaves out. So I'm just going to caveat that because I think once the reviews start rolling in, which will happen at the end of April, certainly there'll be some discourse around some of this conversation. But I really enjoy the book, and I think it's so wonderfully written. It's kind of light on Instagram spats and, the James Corden thing that went down. You can Google that. It's not as flamboyant and, shot-taking as I thought it would be. It's much more introspective. The man is incredibly well read, and he talks about literature, writes about literature in a way that is not flashy, not trying to show his bookshelf on the page. He's just really into literature. He's a filmmaker. He was an actor at a young age in London, something that I didn't really know. From the age of 13 or 14, he appeared in plays in the West End, and really he had a long-time relationship with Alan Bennett, who's an acclaimed playwright. He did the Madness of King George and the History Boys and many other things, and he was in this circle of playwrights and directors in the 60s, in the swinging 60s in London, and really he came from a very modest East London background, so he kind of rose and writes a lot about his family history, and then he ends up in New York, and really the story changes and turns, and he kind of falls into restaurants. He works at 1/5 as a maitre d' and waiter and learns the ropes. And while learning the ropes, he gets the idea to open the Odeon, which he opened in 1978. And that restaurant still remains today. I think we did 3 things about a visit I had in the fall, and it's as good as ever. I don't want to give away the rest of the book because there's much more in this book. And again, the reviews will be coming out. They'll be very interesting to read. And Lynn Wagenknecht, his ex-wife, plays a huge role in the book and is kind of the sneaky hero in the book. And I just loved learning about Lynn, and I'd love to have Lynn on the show, and already made that request. And it's called I Regret Almost Everything.
It's definitely the most talked about book right now, so I love getting to hear your early preview of it.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your next thing?
My next thing is that I finally got to go to Crew for a meal in, I guess I would say it's North Williamsburg, Greenpoint, that part of town last week, which is a contemporary Thai restaurant from a husband and wife duo, Chef who opened Fish Cheeks, which is very popular in Manhattan, and then his wife Kiki. And my friend Ali Damrangchai is a Thai food writer and baker here in New York, and she is always hyping up Crew to me. So I regret that I didn't go with Ali, but I did have a really good time when I was there. And I think that a lot of the small plates that they're doing are just so cool and special. They do these things called savory fruit bites, which is like a beautiful pink pineapple slice or like half of a strawberry. And then it has this caramelized coconut sugar, peanut, like savory mixture on top of it that you pop into your mouth.
Wow.
They have another kind of like petit four sized bite that's like a lobster ceviche on a nori chip with 4 different kinds of tomato on it. They have a take on mee crab that they call crispy noodles, which is like almost this perfect circle of fried noodles bound together with ricotta. And then it has herbs and calamansi on top, squid salad. It was just a really fun and vibrant and special meal.
Lovely food, and we cover the modern Thai restaurant scene in a recent Story and Taste, and I love that you had a meal at Crew. It's been on my list for a long time, and I think talking to chefs in the studio about where they want to go, Crew does come up, and it sounds like the menu is it's not rooted in a tradition or a region. It's the chef flexing a real vocabulary for cooking. I mean, I heard the word ricotta mixed in there.
I mean, I would say it's actually like deeply rooted in many different Thai cooking traditions.
Cool.
A lot of the recipes that they use are dating back like hundreds of years.
No
They have
way.
This really old recipe book, but then I think they do kind of take their own spin on presentation or flavors or different things. And actually, I think that Chef Am would be a really fun person to have into the studio because I think it's so clear that he has a really strong point of view. And Allie was telling me, I asked her, what do you think I should get? And she said, honestly, he rotates out things as soon as they become popular because he doesn't want to get stuck in having to play the hits all of the time, which I think is a really interesting choice for a chef to make. But it means that there's always new things to try there.
That's like a difficult choice because, when you have the hits, people want to play the hits and they arrive. If the menu is always changing, less marketable. But I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
Chefs
it's super cool. What's
Very
your next
cool.
thing?
My next thing is I was back in our favorite Midwestern town, at least the three of us, Clayton, you and I got to visit there last spring, Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh, we do love Madison.
Yeah.
Cheeseheads.
Cheeseheads, exactly. And I was there for a bat mitzvah, and I got to go to a couple restaurants, got to hang out at Tori Miller's, Great Place Gray's. But I went to a place that we didn't visit last spring. I was so surprised about how this simple idea was executed that I had to bring it up. It's called Paul's Pelmeni, which is has a little bit of my college history in it because it is in the space that formerly housed Amy's Cafe, which was directly across the street from the Badger Herald, where I worked as a student editor for 3 years. And that is where I learned to drink Long Island iced teas on Tuesdays, 2 for $4.
2 for $4 is brutal.
2 for $4. That is the 1990s pricing right there. The space is very much the same. There's a bar in the back. There's a counter in the front. Pelmenis in Paul's vocabulary, they're quarter-size dough pouches stuffed with either ground beef or potato. You can order half orders or full. You can order it with the works, which includes butter, cilantro, yellow curry powder, sour cream, and scallions. I just love the execution. They're extremely light. Pillows, really for the price of $7, you're getting something that's exquisitely made daily. I think it would crush in New York City. It's like such a great execution. It's from the chef Paul Schoer, and Paul learned to make pelmeni while living in Alaska, and he just figured out a food that was great for cold weather because there's a great bar in back where you can order craft beers and cocktails and get a plate of pelmeni. And I love this restaurant. It's terrific.
Yeah, I love pelmeni, so I feel like I can see it doing really well in a cold place.
Yeah, it's great.
So fun.
What's your next one?
My last thing is another great meal that I just had. I went to Smithereens, which I know was on your list of restaurants you wanted to go to.
Yeah.
Have you been yet?
No, I haven't. I'm going to Golden Hof tonight, so I'm going to one of my preview restaurants.
Look at us making our way through.
We're gonna make our way through.
Yeah, well, I really liked Smithereens. It's kind of like being in a boat when you walk inside. It's underground, beneath the street level, and they're doing a kind of New England seafood tradition. So it makes a lot of sense. It's a nice duo behind it. Is the chef Nick Tamburo, who is formerly at Claude, and the beverage director is Nikita Malhotra, who is at Momofuku Co. So it's this kind of nice balance between like a little chefy takes on these New England classics and really good wine that goes with them. I had my first rhubarb of the season there, which is a huge moment in my life personally.
They're popping out of the ground.
Well, this is the forest rhubarb from the UK, so it's still like a little early, but it was my first taste of a spring produce, which is just always really self-soothing for me. And I had it with cured fluke and kelp. There's kelp all over this menu.
I love that.
I had anadama bread, which is a porridge-based bread that actually I heard about for the first time because it was mentioned in a comic in the last issue of Cakesian, the bread issue, which is like a porridge-based bread with a seaweed butter. That was really good. I had abalone skewers with shiitake, which I don't normally like. I think abalone can be a more challenging seafood item for me because of how chewy it is, but it was sliced very thin, kind of like ruffled onto this skewer with shiitake mushroom, which has a kind of similar like chewy texture. And it really worked for me. And I was really excited about it because it made me like something that I've been trying to incorporate more into my diet, you know?
I do, and I called that out just reading the menu.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting idea and choice. Abalone coveted in East Asian cuisine, but less, cooked here. And I was curious what the presentation would be like. I personally have a tough hang with abalone. It's too chewy for me.
I really liked this presentation of abalone. It was super delicious. Also, dessert, a lot of cool things going on. I had a celery float for dessert.
No.
Which, when I heard that, I thought it was going to be, in a tall soda glass kind of, but it came in a bowl. It has homemade celery ice cream, then homemade celery soda floating on top of it, like a little kind of textural foam, so to say.
Yeah.
Luxardo cherry, and then coffee oil, which, again, I was not really expecting, but it added a really nice kind of contrasting note to the celery. I would say if you don't like celery, do not order this, but I really like celery soda, and I thought it was really fun.
I love this ideas, the many ideas that you've talked about for this meal, and I can't wait to make it to Smithereens. Sounds amazing.
Yeah, and it is fun to say.
Yeah, it is. How is the soundtrack? Because they have the playlist on their website. Is it even possible to hear it? Because I always find that.
I was just really enjoying chatting, but
your company. Yeah.
I feel like there was probably good music.
The
other thing I would say that I really liked is they have the staff picks written out on the wine menu. Like, when you go to a bookstore and there's like the handwriting from the staff members saying like, this is my favorite fantasy novel. They have that exact same approach, but it's the staff picks for the wine, which I think is a really cool way to kind of like make things feel more familiar or approachable.
I'm feeling the inspiration from Claude and the Momo universe here.
Yeah. The Claude influence is definitely there. I think some of the people in the kitchen like used to work at Claude, and I was there with Phoebe Nguyen, who is, married to one of the operators of Claude and Penny, and they're all kind of next to each other in that same neighborhood. But I think it's nice to see them kind of growing in that kind of way.
Absolutely. I love new downtown restaurants. East Village, right?
Yeah, I think it's on 10th between 1st and 2nd.
Wonderful to see new East Village restaurants pop up.
What's your last thing?
My last thing is, speaking of New York City restaurants, there is a terrific new cookbook from the team at Scars. And I got a chance to sit down with this book finally, had an advanced copy for a minute, and I really like this book. It's has a lot of cool elements in it. It's just to remind everybody who doesn't know, Scars is the restaurant from Scar Pimentel, and he is a pizzaiolo of great acclaim in downtown New York, and his career is cool. He worked at Emilio's Bellato in the kitchen for a couple of years, and then moved on to several pizzerias, as he writes in the book. He worked at Lasso, Artichoke, and Joe's, so he really, honed his craft and really got into the mindset of New York City pizzeria. He opened Scars in 2016, and really, I think this is the beginning of a real pizza boom in New York, and Scars should be credited. And a big part of that is the flour he uses in the dough. He mills his own flour, and this is like an approach that is very common in bakeries, but really in 2016 in pizzerias, less common. And Scar did an amazing job with that pizza, and lines formed quickly. He's since moved across the street and expanded Scars, and the story he tells is about expansion. It's also about the neighborhood, and I really love the way the visual identity of this book flows. The back of the book is something that we don't see a lot in cookbooks, which is, I would say, around 15 spreads of just photography from the terrific photographer Koki Sato, and I really just love that there's so many cool visual elements in this book. It has a lot of recipes. I don't know if he's giving away the story, which is fair. I mean, there's like lots of philosophies about dough and sauce, and the hot boy is, of course, in there is one of his iconic slices. But it's more about the story of Scar and the neighborhood that surrounds Scars. And I love this book. It's terrific.
Yeah, I have gone to Scars for years, and I love their nutritional yeast vegan Caesar. Like, the pizza is good, but I think they're just kind of approach towards food in general is special. So it's fun that the book is out.
Yeah, I think that recipe is in the book as well.
I would assume it would be, because it's so delicious.
It's iconic, but it's called The Scars Pizza Cookbook, and it is out now.
Thanks for sharing your 3 things, Matt.
Thanks, Eliza.
I'm Nomi Fry.
I'm Vincent Cunningham.
I'm Alex Schwartz, and we are Critics at Large, a podcast from The New Yorker. Guys, what do we do on the show every week?
We look into the startling maw of our culture and try to figure something out.
That's right. We take something that's going on in the culture now. Maybe it's a movie, maybe it's a book, maybe it's just kind of a trend.
And we expand it across culture as kind of a pattern or a template.
Join us on Critics at Large from The New Yorker. New episodes drop every Thursday. Follow wherever you get your podcasts.
As the summer travel season approaches, I'm excited to let you know about 2 upcoming Taste Travels, our immersive travel series hosted by cookbook authors and me, Matt Rodbard. On June 15th, I will be joining the Mediterranean dish author Susie Karache in Barcelona for an incredible week of culinary tours, cooking classes, and plenty of wine and jamon. And on September 15th, I will be joining author and baker Mauricio Leo of The Perfect Loaf for a tour of northern Italy. We will visit artisanal Parmigiano Reggiano and balsamic vinegar producers, take a masterclass in the art of panettone, and of course, eat plenty of stuffed pasta and mortadella in and around Emilia-Romagna. Both trips are nearly sold out and closing soon. If interested, write into hello@tastecooking.com and we will get you the information. That's hello@tastecooking.com. I hope to see you on one of our taste travels this summer. Camilla Marcus, welcome to This Is Taste. How are you?
I'm doing well. I am over the moon to be here.
Okay, you're in New York. You lived here for 15 years. You live in LA now. When you're back in your former hometown or your spiritual hometown, you can call it whatever it is, tell me, where are you dining out?
Oh, gosh. So it's an interesting mix of I always try and obviously support and try my friends' restaurants. It's impossible because I have many, many friends who are restaurateurs. So I try at least like one oldie, one new. I'm friends with the guys, but I also think the Penny is like one of the most spectacular restaurants in New York. My move there is often right when they open, right before I head to the airport. And I'm like, I have 30 minutes, hit me with food. I love you guys. I got to go, but I just need that icebox so bad. I really loved Borgo.
Yeah, you went?
I did
on
go.
this trip, like a couple
Always
days.
been a fan.
Yep.
It has the like old Romans vibes to me, which was a big date spot for us. I love Stissing House. Claire's a close friend. And if I can muster a little bit of an adventure, I just love being transported to the Cotswolds. I think is so special.
Yeah, in Pine Plains, New York, of all places.
I know.
Pretty
Well,
cool.
I've got a lot of friends from college who are sort of part of her village up there. And La Industry in the West Village was like the best thing that ever happened to me because I stayed at a friend's right there who, again, kind of know the guys through them. And just like, even if I've had a full meal, if I pass La Industry and I happen to walk down Christopher, I'm definitely getting a pie. It's a sickness.
It is so great to be in Manhattan. Thank you for the industry.
Side note, I'm a like meal, and everyone who knows me here knows I will meet you at from probably noon to 11 p.m. I've had probably 6 or 7 meals. It's gross.
You just had tea at Nicotine before we got here. You're like sneaking in, even up in Midtown, you're hitting up places. I love that.
There's and I keep a running list of kind of like where I want to try, where I want to see. I really wanted to go to Bridges. I couldn't get in this time. Last time I was here, I was only here Sunday, Monday. They're closed. This whole Sunday, Monday closed thing is really messing with my vibe of having to eat at 100 places.
Yeah, Sundays closed is a tough hang for me. Well, let's go back to living in LA growing up. I just like to get a sense, you're a food writer, you're a chef, you are working in CPG, you have this really great, well-rounded background. I love your career. It's so fascinating to dig into. And as I've said on the show, I really love your last book. Really cool. So when you were growing up in LA, what was food like in your home?
It's really interesting because I didn't really come from a food family.
Yeah.
My mom actually is a really good cook, but it's just not really her like passion or joy. And so we always would laugh. She does have the talent. Her dad, so my mom's one of 5. Her mom died when she was young. Her dad was a cardiac researcher. And he really had this passion for food, and she would tell me how he would eat out on dates and then come home and make like duck à l'orange. And even though, they were very, very conscious about money and like they never were allowed to eat out, he would bring this like interesting gourmet food culture to them, which was like kind of lost on all of them. Yeah. But it's funny. I don't know. I just loved restaurants when I was younger. I was the kid. My dad worked in Japan most of my childhood, so I grew up a lot on Japanese culture and food. So I would say that's probably the biggest food influence is that infusion, right? Before that was proliferated through the States. Like you have to remember in the 80s, we were still smoking on airplanes. There weren't like Japanese and sushi restaurants all throughout LA. You literally had to go down to Little Tokyo is the only place to get
downtown,
it.
Right.
So we were the ones that were going down. And because my dad, it was really important to him that we understood kind of like where he was, what he was doing. And I think he had a real appreciation for their craft. And so I'd say growing up, that and then certainly the taco trucks, I think were probably the two biggest influences on me culinarily. But I was the kid at 13 that would beg them to take me to an omakase. And I'd always say to the sushi chefs, hit me with your craziest thing. What's the thing you think that will scare that no white person in LA is going to eat? And they'd be like, who? And I was very small when I was a kid. I grew later in life. And they're like, who's this little tiny person?
Chatterbox. Calling for the uni, double unis. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So let me ask you about establishment LA restaurants, the old school spots, places that, 50s, 60s, 70s. Did you ever have experiences there?
I still have unbelievable memories. So Barbara Lazarus, who is Wolfgang's original wife, who's very much still kind of the guiding light of the enterprise. I mean, she goes way back with my mom. They're both very, very community-centric. She's one of the most charitable people probably in Los Angeles, whether or not people know that. And we used to dine, again, conscious of, spending, but there were moments where my parents really wanted to make things special. And I loved the original Spot Go. On the Hill, it's crazy that space has never been taken over or reinvented because it was the bee's knees. And I think those meals and the vibe, what the two of them were able to do in LA, that was just a moment in time. And I think especially that it doesn't exist and no one's ever even taken over that space for a hot minute. I don't know, right? It would be I don't know.
Katz's being something else, maybe? Is that where you're going with this?
Yeah, or Peter Luger's, right? It was a little more institution, obviously high end. It would be Peter Luger's moving, but then that space, right? It's still a great piece of real estate. It wasn't obscure. So I don't know. For me, that's probably the one that lives, as they say, as the kids say, lives rent-free in my mind. I think about that place weirdly. I'll be driving and I'm like, man, I miss those dinners, especially when you're a teenager and you're just I'm at the coolest place ever.
Yeah, and were you a salmon pizza head? Were you having that one?
Yes, but also Kaiserschmarren, which is now secretively off menu, on menu. I don't know. It's had its own iterations of Sherry Yard.
Oh man, I love Sherry.
Her story, man, give her a documentary. I got to say, her story is very untold.
Totally agree. I think Sherry is one of those individuals in pastry who was a real establishment figure, but kind of hasn't been given that big moment, that chef's table, that documentary. Sure.
I'd probably say, too, look, I think the original Matsuhisa in La Cienega, when Nobu and his amazing wife and family, were there literally every day before the sort of expansion and Myriad Group came in. Those kind of OG days, too, of just, it's so high-end, it's so incredible, but, it's a hole in the wall. That's the thing about LA that I love. You're the best spots are just shacks, basically.
Oh, my God. On Sawtelle. All the spots on Sawtelle, I feel those little spots, those little Japanese spots, too. We could talk about LA all day. We have a lot to cover, though. I never really dig into CVs on guests. I think it can be misleading, but your CV is really interesting. You have a business degree from Wharton. You have an MBA JD from NYU and a culinary degree. It's a lot of education.
Too much.
Amazing. But what were you thinking when building all of this? Because it's kind of amazing and I would say puzzling in a way. You had so many. You could have been a lawyer. You could have been Fortune 500.
I'm a
CMO.
never practicing, always practicing attorney who's bar certified, who never, I did one summer at a law firm.
Yeah.
Crazy enough. And, the horrible answers, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know what I want to be. I don't know what I wanted to be. I still feel I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I'm turning 40 this year and I tell my kids all the time, I'm a kid. I have no idea. I know that you call me mom. I'm supposed to be responsible and I know I run a company, but I don't know. I think, I always say this, I think it's interesting. My generation, there was this resurgence back to specialization and almost a trade focus. A lot of my college roommates became doctors. And I always said to them, I really envy that. I envy you having a calling. Even I worked for Raj Cohen during the TARP bailouts. That was my one summer at a law firm. And,
wow,
one of the coolest experiences you could probably have. Obviously, we all read Too Big to Fail. I read every page.
Yeah, those late nights, working in these high rises, what was the food like?
Actually, I was everyone's favorite summer intern because I actually love food and could get us reservations. And so I was like, got my pick of the litter of like every single day I went to the coolest lunch because, it's not fun to take someone who's not into food if you're a partner or an associate who has a big budget. And this is back in the day when we still had, a little pre-2008 before things got a little course corrected. It was still
TARP
like
bailout,
slush fund.
exactly right in that time.
It was like we were like the last summer of like real, summer lunch slush funds.
Yeah.
But, I think I envy people at that calling. I remember saying to Raj, like, I can see that this is your calling. Like, your face lights up every second of every day. Like, I wasn't really born with that. I mean, I think food has always been my core love. I think it's my love language, how I express myself. I've always loved restaurants since I was younger. Like I said, I was the kid, like we would travel and I would beg to go with the bellman through the back of the hotel and ask them about like, well, how does this get here and how does that get there? And my parents were like, who are you?
You're like an ops person.
What? Totally. And I was like, oh, I want to see the back of the house. I want to see the ugly part. And like, what are you doing? And sometimes it got us free upgrades because we would all share one room and they'd be like, oh, all 5 of you in this one small room. And I'm like, it's great. We're having fun on the sleepover. So I am on a mission to repopularize the generalist. I think the era of this like Renaissance human is a little bit lost. And I feel sad for that because I also think our world is changing so fast that if we're so stuck on this one profession, this one box, this one talent, this one skill, I think you're sort of missing out on like all that life has to offer.
Take me to culinary school. I think you clearly had been educated in law and business, but then you hit culinary school and you're like, is it like to you a career opportunity to be a chef to open restaurants while you're in culinary school? Or did you go to culinary school to start Westbourne and have a culinary background to like back it up, I guess?
So I actually blacked out on this, but my mom tells me that when I came out of the LSAT, I took it my junior year of college. My mom really wanted me to go to law school. My dad's an attorney and a CPA and, all the traditional wonderful Jewish careers. And my mom was like, just take the LSAT, then you have the option. Like, just do that for me. And I go, okay, whatever, sure. So I take it and I guess I like threw my pencils at her and I was like, I'm going to culinary school. And like, then we'll figure out what happens.
Love that. I thought I was thinking reverse. Amazing.
No,
amazing.
Like I said, I loved food. I always loved to cook. I used to cook for like 30 people every weekend, whether it was at, my apartment in college, my husband's frat house. I would like cook for everyone Sunday brunch. Everyone's hungover and like barely functioning. I'd make everyone sit. I loved that. We dined out so, this was like, I always tell Michael Solomonov when I finally met him, I was like, dude, I grew up on your restaurants. Your first one in Northern Philly, like before, Zahav and the Big Moment, like we were going to your restaurant. My buddy was your first GM, like someone that I grew up with. I loved that culture so much. And I think culinary school for me originally was really just for me. Like I knew I loved to cook and I was sort of like, I think I could cook Thanksgiving better one day if like I actually knew what I was doing. And I'm very, as I said, I'm self-taught. I didn't have like the grandmother recipe book. I didn't have the Nona that like taught me all the techniques. It was just from eating out and trying to replicate it kind of like my mom's dad. So I really went for me and I totally fell in love. I mean, I love the intensity. I'm very left brain, right brain. And I think cooking in restaurants has both of those because there's this, I always love telling chefs, I'm like, you're so good at math. You do physics and chemistry. The world just tells you you're bad at math and science, but actually you're a genius. You just don't see it because the world treats food and culinary as like this other art form kind of
the art is
a little bit.
The artist sometimes overshadows the science, but if you like work in a production kitchen, the gram scales are out and those production recipes, and it's like you're making these split-second mathematical equations work, particularly on the pastry side. Insane. The brains on you and you're in the industry.
But any technique is like why the order is the way it is, like why you cook certain things in different ways. So I loved the intensity of it. We had 25 people from different countries. Many, many languages. I'm lucky I grew up speaking Spanish. Like, it just was this totally, I'm very high octane. I don't know if you follow the Enneagram, but I'm a 7.
Yeah.
It is like everything is more enthusiasm, experience, adventure. I went skydiving when I was 18 years old by myself with my dad. Like, I'm high octane. So it just spoke to my soul. I don't know that I went like knowing what I was going to do, but I knew I always loved restaurants. I knew I loved cooking, and it it was exactly just like everything I wanted. I was obsessed. And like, Dave Arnold was one of my teachers, again, like kind of before he started Booker.
Is that FCI you're at?
Yeah.
Yeah, FCI.
Like the OG days when the restaurant was there.
Yeah.
And like, even that I loved. Like, I loved it. My friends at 22 could come to a restaurant and I cooked their meal.
That's
and there
pretty
was
cool.
just, gosh, I mean, I still think about those days. And I'm also a night owl, which works when you're a chef. So like, my husband was in his first year of law school and, I would like crawl into bed at 6 a.m, just like high on life.
Well, let's move on to Westbourne. I think this is the appreciation section. Eliza and I share a great fondness for your restaurant. No, for real.
Don't
like
make me cry.
we spent, I think mutually, a lot of time there. I remember having meetings there. I remember going there between going to the office. I feel like I had every meal possible there. Really, 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 at the time, I identified it as pioneering in a way. Just the all-day cafe had not even really touched our shores, and you were doing it. I want to hear a little bit about, for the show, what you were doing early on at Westbourne, and a little bit about, closing it. I mean, I don't want you to cry, you said, but that must have been a really, understatement century, a bummer to put so much into this space and build this community and then have to say bye to it.
Oh, there's a lot in there. Where do we unpack?
Yeah.
Look, I think the interesting thing with Westbourne was it really came out so much of seeing my friends, obsessed with the conscious capitalism movement, right? What their shoes are going to do for a community, what they're made of. They're obsessed with clean makeup. And, this shirt donates to, people around the world. And I was like, yeah, but you get a coffee 3 times a day. You eat meals 3 times a day. And when I was working with Danny Meyer, opening their restaurants, I was sort of like, this is actually the annuity. And that's also where sort of my like TARP mind, kind of my finance brain, I was like, imagine if people cared about where they got their coffee, their glass of wine every single day, multiple times a week. We were talking kava. Steve used to say, food and beverage is 100% TAM.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that.
Yeah.
You have to eat to survive. It is I've said this over and over. I feel like a little bit of a broken record, but you make more decisions about what you eat and drink in your daily life than anything else by many times over. And so I think it was this marriage of, I always cared about sustainability. I'm from LA. I always thought about impact. I'm very community oriented, very much so through, sort of how I was raised. And just seeing this, even working with Danny, I started getting really involved in school lunch with wellness in the schools. And I would bring all of our chefs with, I worked very closely with Mike Anthony and, Jason Pfeiffer, and we would go around to all the schools. And I would say, I remember even saying to Danny, like, this company actually does so much that's charitable and so community oriented. And yet I don't think the average diner who's sitting at Maialino has any clue how much of an anchor, not just in what they do in the 4 walls, but how much we're giving back and extending ourselves because that's just who we are. And how do we connect that, right? That person that's sitting there that's so obsessed that they're wearing Allbirds, how do we make them feel that way about a cup of coffee? So really that was the core of Westbourne, was from, sourcing regeneratively and conscious farms to no plastic in the restaurant. We were the first to do compostables. Like, all the conversations now around plastic is so LOL to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, didn't we know that plastic water bottles were toxic? I mean, in the 80s?
I recall.
Don't leave them in your car. Remember those?
I recall, having a coffee and having no compostable or I guess no plastic. And I remember it being like, what is going on at this place? Like, this is like, I was like, this is good for us, but like, it's kind of annoying, but I loved it as well. And just like back to that quick comment about TAM, like total addressable market, like it feels like food is 100% TAM. And that's really, really key to what we do on the show. Everyone has, eats between 2 and 8 times a day, depending on their day. And we sometimes forget that.
And I find it interesting. I think for whatever reason, I do think it's American culture versus other cultures. We compartmentalize so much of that, right? Like I said, you could be so obsessed with your jeans being regenerative cotton, but then you're not thinking consciously about how you're spending your money when you're having dinner or like what you're ordering. And so there were a couple things. Westbourne, the restaurant, was kind of like my pre-opus, if you will, which is, we started sourcing from regenerative farms, but not necessarily talking about it. We were our entire restaurant. We were the first zero waste certified restaurant with the True certification. They do LEED certification. And it was funny even going through the process because, the questions would be like, well, how did you change from this to this? And we would be like, we never did it the other way, right? Like there wasn't a day. I would have chefs and restaurant owners and hotel owners and business owners ask me, well, like, how do you do it? How did you get someone to compost? I'm like, that bin's never been anything but green. And like we never threw food out like that. We just didn't do it. And so it just constantly got better and better. So, a zero waste mindset, a regenerative mindset was sort of at the core. But then we also saw, right, you can't have sustainability at your core and then have unsustainable operations. You have to think about labor differently. We had no back of house or front of house. We had a rotational program. A lot of that came out of my corporate days. Like, look at what works in banks, right? Or even in law firms. If you can rotate around, it builds business empathy, right? Like, I'll never forget. I always think about this day where we had someone on the line and someone taking orders and they were sort of bickering about something. And, there's always this chefs think that front of house doesn't do their job and front of house thinks that chefs don't know how hard their job is. And so I said, guess what? Tomorrow, you're going to switch.
Yeah.
And without fail, every person who, identified more as a cook would be like, man, I do not want to talk to anyone anymore. That was horrible. 8 hours. I go 8 hours of fielding like requests, complaints, complications is really, really hard. It's a different kind of hard. But it did build much more of a team solidarity. A lot of the reasons we did it was for business empathy, but also kind of what you were saying before. I believe in the generalist. I think if you train people at a young age, different skill sets, right, they might eventually become a barista. But you know what? How could they know if they're not given the chance? And to be fair, a lot of that came out of my own growing up in restaurants. Like, I remember at USHG, my first day, they had this huge La Marzocco, and I'm like, oh, yes, I love coffee. And, someone in the office was like, oh, no one knows how to use that. And I said, can I train with counterculture? Can I go and train on my off hours so I know how? They're like, that's so weird. No one ever asked that. I go,
that's
great.
Your DNA.
So I became the barista. And then in addition, I said, can I join some? I want to do all these SOM trainings. It's so cool. That I was turned down for. And even at Westbourne, I actually just did a little Instagram post that I don't think like people really read captions anymore, but true story. Like, we were one of the first to also bring a lot of California producers, a lot of vineyards that had no distribution in New York, a lot of brands and CPG companies. I would get them distribution through Baldor because TJ's awesome and we're pals. We were bringing a lot to New York that didn't exist there and now seems like a distant memory and people probably won't remember. But I remember calling distributors, I won't name names, but, very highly regarded kind of cool kid distributors in wine. And they would write back to me and say, you're not a SOM, you're not a beverage director, no. And I would have to write back, I'm so sorry. And I'm a genuinely kind person. And I would write, I'm so sorry, this was actually a pleasantry. That vineyard has already sold me those cases.
Yeah,
I have been on the farm and I am already committed. This is a courtesy, and actually, you don't get to tell me no. But can you imagine? It's like a Pretty Woman moment. You're like, is my money not green?
Yeah.
My restaurant hasn't passed your regard, and I'm not a wine director, so I couldn't possibly know good wine. And that's the barriers I was trying to break because I was limited from people saying, stay in your lane. You're not a SOM. You can't do SOM training. Why are you... Like when I even started at with Danny, I said to them, before I start my job, I got the job offer in November and I said, I need time off. I'm going to see you in February. And they were like, excuse me? It was after Super Bowl, actually, because I'm a Broncos fan. The Broncos were in the Super Bowl.
They did it, a Manning era. Yeah.
Yep. And so I said, look, I need time off. Then my family's going to the Super Bowl if Denver makes it. And then I'll start the next day. And then I said, and by the way, I want to work at least 3 days in every single restaurant, including Shake Shack, because they hadn't gone public yet. And then I'll start my job. And they were like, who is this?
I mean, this
crazy?
was the director of ops job, right? I mean, this was like...
No, I was director of business development.
Oh, okay. Well, even more important that you had to understand exactly how the business...
But no one had ever done that before.
I mean, back to...
And they were like, you are insane. Plus, you're telling us that basically your job doesn't start in 6 months. Like, you're an insane person. But I will tell you, I said, how can I grow these businesses? I don't know who they are. I don't know what makes them tick. I don't know their strengths. I don't know what they want to work on. You can't impose a business plan on something that you don't understand. Yeah. And they're not going to listen to me or want me to help them if we don't have a rapport. So every restaurant, I'd say, it's funny, like Good old days. I mean, I miss Floyd so much. And man, that was like such a fun
Yeah.
tour. Wouldn't let me touch anything. And he would just make me watch him. And I was, and then Shake Shack, my first day at Times Square, they go, great, you ready to expo? Like literally the hardest day of work I've ever done in my entire life was expediting Times Square.
And that was like
service.
when there were like a few Midtown locations. So like we're talking about like lines before Shake Shack was.
I was like, I think I'm gonna have a nervous breakdown, and I'm a very even keel person.
That's a high volume
It's like,
spot.
this person deserves a raise. Whoever is doing this job needs a raise.
Well,
So again, the generalist theme, now that I'm thinking about it and we're talking about it, was very much, I think that was the ethos of the restaurant, was breaking a lot of those barriers and helping people realize this industry is an amazing training ground for any career, whether you stay in it or not. It's so rich with education, experience, growth, empathy, skills. I could eat it up with a spoon. So yes, closing it was probably one of the hardest points of my life.
In hindsight, with all you've said and laid out about the progressive business practices and the sustainable sourcing and everything you just said, I mean, did you feel like you weren't leveraging that correctly with the public? Because it feels like, I mean, were you afraid of greenwashing perhaps? I mean, because like it seems like if you would have laid it out, I mean, you're great with media, so like you clearly were doing media, but like it could have probably been done more on leveraging it and getting into the public consciousness that you are here to change the world and change restaurants. I mean, is that something that maybe
Matt's going to be hired as my, as my team tomorrow. It's interesting. In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. I mean, we did a lot of that, and we actually were very lucky because we could touch so many different media outlets. It didn't just have to be food. I think that's one. Two, I mean, a huge part of our business was these amazing activations we would do with unbelievable brands. And that was actually like a huge way of how we sort of spread the gospel, but also sort of transformed us. Again, we could reach outside the four walls. I mean, one, remember, we were closed by COVID. I mean, we just had a horrible landlord. All I wanted to do was go percentage rent for 2 years. Yeah. And I said to him, every restaurant in New York who's a first-time restaurateur has a personal guarantee. I think those should be illegal. I've been on record many times saying that it's predatory. And I said to him, I have a personal guarantee, and every other day the government's shutting us down. And my 50-seat restaurant just turned into a 10-seat who God knows what. I'm willing to transform it and sort of keep our business, centered on our mission, but we need to be in more partnership. I can't stick to fixed rent. This is absolutely unattainable with 700 square feet. I mean, give me a break. He wouldn't break. So I do think we also kind of like got cut at the knees, if you will, at exactly that year where things kind of click in restaurants.
There's a lot of
come
examples.
Out of free fall.
There's a lot of examples of just like bad luck in having just the wrong landlord at the wrong time. And what's in the space now?
I don't know. I can't walk down that street.
You don't even walk
like emotionally, I just can't. My friends laugh. I like literally will walk all the way around. I go to King all the time. A lot of my friends own restaurants around there. I won't go down. So I don't know. But I will say what's interesting is, to your point as well, I was told, I mean, even at the time, I will tell you, I was told by certain publicists, we can't name you as a chef because you're not on the line 24/7. And I said, but this is my menu. This is my ethos. And like, hi, Dave. He's an old friend. Like, Dave's not on the line 24/7. Dave Chang's not. A lot of chefs aren't. It's impossible. And like, if you're a mom, you have kids, like it's physically impossible. So one, I was told that, which really limited a lot. And I learned a lot from not saying, now I stand up for myself a lot more. And I would say got pushed by that. But two, I also had a lot of publicists and a lot of media say, well, because remember, we were also plant-based. We never talked about being vegetarian, but we were. Our whole idea was accidentally vegetarian so that you could see being plant-based a couple days a week could be as elevated, as interesting, as culinarily, exciting. And then, years later, that same publicist who said, no one will take it seriously as a cuisine, no one wants to take you seriously as a chef, was core to elevating 11 Madison Park as a vegan restaurant and sharing the gospel through Daniel Hum. So I write about this in the book, probably more PC than I'm maybe even being now. But, I think that is where I tapped in with the book was, and a big reason why I wanted to write the cookbook. I think the culinary scene has caught up to that and has seen that what's now considered climate cooking is actually more interesting. And that was always my feeling is, hey, I could cook you a perfect steak, especially everyone using, sous vide and all these technologies, which I've never been my beat. I'm a Californian. We believe in like raw and as earthy as possible. But challenging yourself, not just putting that meat on a plate. I mean, I just did something this summer with Audemars Piguet, who I'm obsessed with, and I just love them as a brand and their ethos and what they do. And I remember I didn't tell them I was pregnant. We interviewed over Zoom, and I was literally 9 months pregnant, like weeks from delivery. I could not have been bigger. And we did their Royal Oak launch in LA, their first female watch. And we did the tasting, and they were like, whoa. I was like, I'm good. I'm not going to give birth here. And I said to them, I'm going to open your eyes that this can be an entirely plant-based meal, and we will blow people's minds. And just trust me, let me take you on this adventure. So I agree with you. I think that there was more we could do. I think, one, we didn't have the time, but two, I also didn't have the time because we closed prematurely due to COVID.
The timing was not in your control. I mean, clearly COVID and a bad landlord is end of game for you.
But it's still my mission, I think, in our industry to, surprise, delight, and sort of push the boundaries of what we consider interesting, elevated, and, obviously importantly, craveable and delicious through the lens of, health for our planet and ourselves. And
Last Westbourne question. Does it return as a brick and mortar? At some point, do you open a cafe?
I've been asked that so many times.
Yeah. Your fans are saying that right now.
Oh, I wish. I'm always up for a pop-up. Hit me up.
Yeah.
I always love collabs. I want to do – so my original career was actually in hotels. And that's one of the things also that I was able to bring to USHG was a lot of the hotel experience. Long term, at some point, I'll develop a hotel. I have something sort of secret in the works.
Very cool.
Hotels, because I want to do it on a bigger scale. But I will always be a restaurant person. It is it's in my blood.
California, upstate, New York. Are we talking about South Florida?
I'm going to blow your mind. It's a place that's not even on your radar.
It's not even on your radar. We'll chat with Mike. I can't wait to hear it. All right.
That'll be part 2.
Okay, part 2. You'll be back for sure. All right. I want to talk about the industry.
He just wants me to drop out of his DM so I don't bug him all the time.
I love you in the DMs. Please continue. I love it. Okay. Let's talk about the industry. You mentioned your industry, and you have held leadership roles at the Independent Restaurant Coalition. You co-founded Roar. And so you've been speaking to the public about your industry and speaking to politicians about your industry. So this question, I've posed it before to food writers and folks. John DeBerry and I spoke about it at length as well in that episode. Definitely go check that one out. But I want to know, in talking with politicians at, the state, at the city, at the federal level, what can they do right now in this time in 2025 to help the industry sustain? I don't mean thrive. I mean just sustain and survive.
Yeah. And it goes to your other question of would I bring back a brick and mortar? I'm very sad to see the state of this industry. My first job was at Del Anima, RIP. Yeah. Hardest time I've ever cried, honestly, was closing my restaurant. And when that closed, I couldn't even breathe at the bar. And the team was like, please leave. You're scaring everyone. Oh. Seeing the drastic change of the business, and again, I think it's American, how we devalue restaurants, how we devalue it as a profession, how we devalue it in our society. And that is a lot of what we were able to achieve with the IRC and Roar. I still think people don't totally understand, as well as our government. Second largest employer in the country, number 1 employer of single mothers, number 1 employer for first-time jobs, number 1 employer for second chances. It is the gateway to a thriving middle class as a singular industry. The fact that we do not have a permanent seat at the table in government, the fact that we are not part of, even policy around parental leave. The people at the table are tech and, the Walmarts of the world. And you're like, whoa. We're talking about parental leave. And most parents who need parental leave work in restaurants. Where's the seat? I think the number one thing, I think there's 2 really big things if we're really talking brass tacks. And I've said this for a long time. You look at the P&L, that's really what fundamentally has to change. The biggest thing in government's control, most restaurants pay up to 30% total corporate taxes. The biggest driver of that, payroll taxes. Restaurants employ 3, if not up to 10x the amount of people per sales, per square footage, per everything. That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a problem when then on top of that, you pay huge payroll taxes.
You need bodies to make restaurants work. It just is part of it.
But also you want that. Who else is employing these people? So
Right.
Instead of it being taxed, it needs to be flipped. It should be a tax incentive. If you are a restaurant, if you are a hospitality company, and you employ whatever the level is, I'm sure they could come up with some sort of level. If you trigger this level where you are X amount of people per sales or X amount of people per square footage, you actually get that payroll tax back. That's 10 to 20 points on your P&L. Like that.
Yeah,
and that is
that's the
doable.
difference.
Look at all these other businesses. Look at tech. There are tons of tax incentives for real estate companies. You know, it's one of the benefits of working in a lot of industries. I know how they work. I know how they're incentivized, and I know how they pay. Payroll taxes is the biggest thing that I think rightly, not just because and not as a gift. And that's what I used to say to the SBA when we were working on the Restaurant Revitalization Act. I'm not here to make you be a good person. I'm here to make it in your interest to be a good person. That is good for the goose and good for the gander. Give it back to the company, and then you can contingent it on, you get the 20% for payroll, for benefits, for parental leave, for all the things that restaurants want to give to their employees. But it's impossible to do when you have low single-digit EBITDA, if at all.
Yeah, if that all.
It's not a public
the margins
utility.
Of this business is because of what exactly you say that the payroll taxes is razor thin. You're
30,
single
when
digits.
I tell people the second largest employer in the country pays 30% corporate taxes all in, that is sick.
Yeah, when you don't know the P&L of a restaurant, you see that, you're like freaking out because there's just no benefits. Let's pivot.
Well, I was going to say, and then real quick, the second is, I think taxes is one of the biggest ones. And I think, again, an area that I think could be done very quickly. And again, sort of like with the requirement that money goes back into benefits and things that can be measured and really good for
and restaurants would obviously applaud this. Like, it's not like the partners are looking to pad their end of year bonuses. It's like, we want this thing to work long term, so let's get parental leave on the books by flipping that tax. Exactly what you said.
Totally. And look, I think the other piece of it is real estate. I think that we have really, and again, as someone who worked in development most of their early career, I worked in real estate, private equity, focused on hotels. You know, I said this again very publicly when COVID hit. In New York and a lot of major cities, you know, the way the tax incentive structure works, vacancy does not lose money for a landlord for 5 full years. 5 years.
Yeah.
So there's no incentive to negotiate. And again, I think there's a lot of like restaurants build out the space. They put millions into a space. The landlord owns the build out essentially because anything nailed to a wall they own. FF&E isn't worth that much. And so you have all this capital improvement, all the risk on the restaurant. Again, then they get taxed for their lease. The real estate system, when it comes down to restaurants, is also very misaligned. And again, I think within our grasp to realign. And again, I'm not trying to make anyone be a good person just on principle. How do you create incentives where a landlord is incentivized, whether that's through tax breaks, whether through restructuring,
to keep the restaurant running?
Not only just keep it, but say, hey, if you lease to a restaurant, these are the benefits you get.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you're a percentage rent, which is what all leases should be, this is what you get. Hey, by the way, it's illegal to have a personal guarantee on a restaurant. No retail lease should be allowed to have a personal guarantee. I think it's absolutely predatory. And I think, frankly, it doesn't work for anyone. And I think it's really abhorrent. So even those elements, I think there's a lot in this lease dynamic where, again, restaurants are being treated in the broader retail category similar to payroll taxes, but it doesn't fit, right? Like, I would always say this example. I mean, I had 30 people on the payroll. We opened 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. at Westbourne 7 days a week out of the gate. We did no phase-in. January 10th, we were open
Seems
every
like your
single
vibe.
day.
Seems like your
Totally.
vibe. Yeah.
I know, it's sick. I've got problems. But I was sort of like, we might as well rip the Band-Aid off because there's nothing worse. I mean, I don't know. I went through so many restaurant openings and I was like, every time we introduce a new service, it's like we're back to square one. This feels horrible. Like, let's just rip the Band-Aid off and do it.
Yeah, just be open and flow.
Just hire the team. I don't know. I always felt like the phase and I was like, I don't think this actually makes it easier personally. But, you know, for example, like we had 30 people for less than 1,000 square feet. The retail store next to us employed one person for 1,000 square feet. So it gives you the sense of the magnitude. And then again, our lease structure is the same. Our TI is the same. We have equipment. We have exhaust. We have real infrastructure, tons of safety, tons of code, way more compliance, way more licensing. Why are we being in the same, why are we in the same bucket?
Again, and we go back to
Should
Tam.
be more like healthcare.
We go back to Tam, too. Like, restaurants are so foundational. Everybody needs them in their lives. They don't necessarily need a cell phone store
And more
or a
importantly,
boutique.
what we learned in COVID, which we've soon very much forgotten, who do you think keeps the streets safe? Who's open late at night? Who's open early in the morning? When those restaurants are closed, I actually think they're even more important as community anchors because people are around. It's what keeps people on the streets. It's what keeps people involved in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
It keeps people out of their homes. And you look at even just something as simple as like street safety and
Camilla,
a sense of community.
It's such a great point. We
It's
always
insane.
forget about that. Like, these are places that keep neighborhoods alive and thriving.
And secure.
And secure. I want to ask you straight up about minimum wage, especially in California.
Hot button.
Hot button. And I think I've had very, very plugged in, intelligent, articulate folks on the show who've been on both sides of this. And I've had chefs say, California's minimum wage hikes are killing us. And then I've had labor activists say that they're just not there. They're not enough. Like, we need to pay our employees more. I know this can't be answered in a soundbite, but
Yes, it can.
all right, let's do it. What do you think?
It's not about that. It's really not about that. It is, again, like I said, restaurants have been put in the wrong industry category. That's really the base of it. Restaurants need to be their own category. Independent restaurants, not fast food chains, not fast casual. I'm talking where you have a lot of people. It's not tech enabled. We're talking about real service, extended hours, high touch, service and creation, like the heartbeat of our country. When that business model decides to be looked at as its own and gets rethought, like I said, 30% corporate taxes. Minimum wage can't be decided in a vacuum. Tipping can't be decided in a vacuum. I have so much to say about that too. It is, again, an interesting industry where, one, I think we need to look at that tax bracket. 30% is a huge piece of the P&L that, like I said, could be earmarked. Okay, you get your payroll taxes back, but you have to meet certain minimum wage requirements.
Yeah.
That works, regardless of what it is. It's not the rate itself. It's not the concept of paying people and compensating them. It's the whole model with razor-thin margins and everyone thinking that they can tell you how to run your business. It becomes impossible. I always say it's the only industry where, one, everyone thinks they can do it. Like, you don't get your teeth cleaned and you go out the next day and you're like, I am going to be a dental hygienist.
Right.
Everyone eats at a restaurant. They're like, I could own a restaurant. I could do that. And I'm like, not really. But also, we are regulated. It is an industry that is so overly regulated to such an absurdity. And there is this feeling, like I said, that it's a public utility. Like, there is no other industry. Google's not told how people are compensated. Yeah. They're not told what bonuses are. The whole tipping culture, again, regardless of what you feel about minimum wage and tipping, this level of granular detail, even the break stuff, you're telling adults when they need to take a break, for how long and where and when. It is so insane. There's no other job.
It's insulting when you have to be a GM and tell and kick people out of the kitchen in California. You see this all the time.
They're adults.
That's
Why are we telling companies how to structure? Not even, it's so granular how they're being told how to compensate, how to bonus, how to schedule, how to break. It's almost like you don't trust them. There's this government perspective on, I can't for the life of me understand how it got to this place where it's so heavily regulated, where you can't even run your own team at any level. Like I said, training, now staging, now tipping, now minimum wage, now hours, now overtime and breaks. I mean, it's like a hornet's nest of a decision tree that becomes honestly insanity to manage. And then on top of that, I think on top of that, then again, right, then there's, well, things are too expensive and this shouldn't be worth that. And, restaurants shouldn't be paid that. We have a very devaluing of restaurant culture, of the profession.
Constantly.
Of what we get from restaurants. Yeah. And then they're being puppeted and told, even the straw ban. I mean, we never, again, we were compostable. We had no plastic. But I was even anti the straw thing. You're like, you don't go into Google and tell them, you know what, tomorrow you're not allowed to have napkins.
Yeah.
Even the cash thing. I was very vocal and we had a lot of fights in the restaurant with guests.
Going cashless.
We were cashless from the start.
Yeah.
Before anyone was even talking about it. But you know why? Because the corner coffee shop at 7 a.m. was held up at gunpoint for $100 in the cash register. 2 kids, 18 years old.
Yeah. Yeah,
And so I would say to people, you think that the safety of my team who's here at off hours when no one else is even awake or on the street should be risking their lives. And then what happens is then now 3 people have to be opening a restaurant, not 1, because it's not safe, because there's cash. You think someone's job at midnight should be to do a cash drop? I think that's insane that quote unquote access, which by the way, every CVS on every single corner will give a cash card. Don't talk to me about access. It's not actually about access. That's what they want you to believe. It's another way to tell restaurants. It's like if you want to puppet it, you want this to be a public good, you want this to be a utility, then let's make it a utility and let's make these nonprofits and let's talk tax incentives.
Yeah.
But you can't have your cake and eat it too. So
are you going to Washington?
minimum wage. Wasn't I already there?
I mean, I just
minimum wage is the red herring. It's the red herring and it sounds good in a soundbite, just like cash and access. And all these people who talk to me about access, I go, the CVS in the corner that's open 24/7, you can get a cash card. I don't think that my team being unsafe is worth that to me. And I'm sorry that you do, but I don't. And I don't want them walking out of here being tipped out and getting mugged down the block because everyone knows the night shift makes more money because of alcohol and then they get hijacked. Yeah. No, it's not worth it to me. All of this stuff is red herrings, and the bigger issue is the business model. The bigger issue is overregulation of an industry that's being treated differently than others, and then the same where it counts. Yeah. It's a red herring. It's not about that.
What does it start at the local level? How do we flip the?
No.
I mean, tax code is federal, right? It's a federal. This is a Washington D.C. thing. Okay.
I mean, the local stuff is like the real 5,000 paper cuts, but it's not really where the real jugular. And by the way, same with minimum wage. I mean, somewhat state, but they all compound.
Yeah, they do. I think the landlord.
And by the way, I'm not anti-minimum wage, but it just these decisions keep being made in a vacuum. And again, it becomes these little whacks that make it right. The books keep being toppled onto each other instead of someone holistically saying. I think vacancy taxes
can start at the local level, right? I think New York City could pass some vacancy tax.
Honestly, the biggest swing is payroll tax.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
And where I think it is, again, the good for the goose and good for the gander. It just seems like it could be a win-win, and it is a big part of the P&L. I always look for, like, what's the bigger wedge and what's actually practical rather than beating our chest and beating the drum of, like, the million different things that are problematic.
Stick with the core point.
Let's work on one thing that's possible.
Let's get that. Let's flip this and actually...
we got serious.
No, I love it. And it's a wonderful, wonderful intel for our listeners who maybe haven't thought about a restaurant's P&L ever or this week.
Or how many times you regulate a restaurant over stuff that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like even the cashless, I would say to people, does Amazon, do they have to take cash now?
Yeah, exactly.
How is that any different? And you buy way more from Amazon than you do your coffee at your local restaurant. Give me a break.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the diner from the diner's point of view. I want to ask you about being a responsible diner and really how most of us who don't work in the industry can support restaurants. I think we freak out when we look at prices these days. We know what costs of goods are creating, what these costs are built into this inflationary time we're in. And these are not restaurant owners who are looking to make an extra buck. They're just trying to survive. I want to get your take. How do you, as a diner, look at your restaurant spending? How do you become a responsible diner? Is there a way for us to support and maybe do we have blind spots as restaurant fans?
Oh, probably yes. I was like, is that mean to say?
No, yes.
I think there's a couple things. I think first, do dine out. I mean, I do think people who are sort of like, I always find it interesting. I hear from a lot of people, oh, well, I'm conscious of budget and I want to be thoughtful. I think there's always, when there's a will, there's a way. A lot of times you see those people and I'm like, those are really sweet kicks. Saw you about a new pair of J's. Like, I'm going to be honest, that's a dinner out. Like, we all make our choices where we spend our capital, and I think it is up to you to decide where that value goes. I think everyone can figure out how to make it work at whatever level restaurant feels comfortable. So I think first and foremost, especially when times are tough with what's happening, I think in the world, I think economically with California, like I've said to all my, I got tons of calls with the LA fires from New York friends, like, what can I do? And I said, buy gift cards from restaurants. Like, people are home. They're panicked, they're freaking out. And the first people that respond to crises are restaurants, and the first people to get hit hard are restaurants. The last people to get help and relief and support are restaurants. So number one, do eat out. Two, I think you got to go into it like, right, movies. Movies were like $5 when I was a kid. Now I feel like old saying that. But right, you kind of don't even look at the price of a movie ticket anymore. And let me tell you, it's egregious for an hour and a half.
Even with the reserved seating and the recliners.
But like, why can't we look at restaurants with that lens of like, you know what? I'm going for an experience. This is actually dinner and a show. This is actually my night's event and experience. Why can't we go into it with that feeling, being less critical, being kind, elevating this business and these jobs? You go to Europe and it's a real level of respect for what they do. People see someone who's a career server as every bit important as the banker that they deal with. There is something in American culture that there's not that level of reverence, and I would like to encourage us to transform into that. And then I think last is high margin items.
Yeah.
Drinks, liquor, dessert, like really thinking about the fact that like the thing you love the most about restaurants probably makes them the least amount of money. And that's all great. That's the experience. That's the dinner and the show. But like thinking about those items that like I sort of feel sad when people bring their own wine to restaurants.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, again, maybe unpopular opinion, but that is a huge element. That's a big profit driver and a big margin driver that balances other things out. Your main dish probably is a break-even dish.
Particularly if you love a restaurant.
Totally.
Like you could be mid on a restaurant, like you're like penny to you, like be a restaurant regular. Michael McCarty has said this many times. Be a regular and buy a drink, buy dessert, tip well, of course. But like if
well, that was going to be my last was tipping.
Yeah.
I find it amazing how many people who say they love restaurants are like basically doing calculus to try and figure out what the right tip is. And I'm like, just tip generously. And they'll be like, oh, well, this was off and I didn't like this and this was, delayed. And I'm like, we're arguing brass tacks over $10. Like, give me a break.
Yeah. I mean, you've already spent enough on your blowout for that meal. So
that's what I'm saying. Like
crazy.
Going out and putting your hands up a little more and being a little more along for the ride with an open mind, open heart, and a real kindness of spirit, the way that you do, right? When you pay $20 for your red vines, you're just like, it's part of the movie experience. Like, why can't we go to restaurants with that same joy, really?
What about delivery services, Uber Eats, Seamless, all that stuff? It seems like this is part of our culture, especially if we live in cities.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like it's working out for the restaurants. Is there a way to get around that? I mean, are you a Seamless user yourself?
I'm not a Seamless user. I'd say our delivery is probably lower than most. Again, we cook, we shop at the farmers markets, we eat out. Like, I eat out a lot. I think that's a whole other hour unto itself. And again, I think this is where you say sort of like follow the money, look at the business model, look at what's being allowed and where these like incentives and money goes, right? A lot of the delivery logistics businesses, one, no one's really proved that it works on that side of the coin.
Yeah.
But arguably the dollars are like gargantuan compared to what restaurants are even talking about in dollars and cents. But there's a trade-off, right? I think the model does not work today. I think that, again, the expectations and sort of where that lies with diners is problematic, but I think we're very far from figuring that dynamic out.
It's a hard one because it does bring in so much business, just in plain speak, that being on the apps is a great marketing tool for these restaurants and putting butts in the seat.
But that's the thing. I think it's a marketing tool. I think the question is whether it is really putting butts in seats or replacing butts in seats.
Well,
I don't know that
is when you're delivering. I meant like just like business in general, like
but
top
it's like
line
a
revenue.
whole separate part, right? Like it actually operationally is very intense on restaurant service and on the operation. Like, it seems like it would be like, I feel like the delivery companies position it as, oh, this is going to be gravy. But the truth is, it's not that easy to operationalize.
Well, you need more staff, and then you've got this additional tax burden for that extra staff member, and so you just
and it's really expensive on the apps. But then also, it's not your best work, right? Because it came off the line 30 minutes before it got to your door, and the delivery driver got lost. Oh, by the way, they dropped it. Oh, they gave you the wrong one, and everyone. This is, again, let me tell you, restaurants are the punching bags for like all problems.
Yeah,
and then they get blamed. But they didn't have anything to do. They're like, I handed them the pasta off the line was perfect. And then it got to your door and it like went through Disneyland and you're mad at me.
Yeah. Attention New York City listeners, I'm excited to share 2 upcoming live This Is Taste tapings that I think you're going to like, taking place at Rizzoli Bookstore in Manhattan's Flatiron District. On April 8th, I will be joined by Barbara Costello, better known through her Brunch with Babs social accounts. We will be talking about her brand new cookbook, Cooking with Babs. And on May 5th, I will be joined by photographer and journalist Craig Maude for a reading and conversation about his debut memoir, Things Become Other Things. I love this book so much and welcome you all in to hear his story about walking around Japan and so much more. Tickets are available at the Rizzoli website, rizzolibookstore.com. I hope to see you there. Yeah. Camilla, on This Is Taste, we ask us about their discerning taste. So to close the interview, here's a little rapid fire, fast and furious taste check. Are you ready?
I am.
The best fruit.
Yuzu.
The worst vegetable.
I can't get into celeriac. I just don't understand
Tough
it.
hang.
Tough hang. Unpopular opinion because I love vegetables. I have a really hard time.
Yeah.
I can't figure it out. Never had one I liked.
Grease. Just saying that.
Okay, we'll go together.
They know their way around it, so celeriac. What's your typical breakfast?
Cappuccino.
That's cool. You say that, you're kind of gritting your teeth, so you're just not a breakfast person.
I'm really not a morning person. I'm a night owl.
Yeah.
I love breakfast food. I love brunch. I love the slow experience of breakfast, but my mind really is not totally with it till about 11 or noon.
Yeah.
I do my best thinking around midnight. Like, I am a night owl
you
through
know
and
it.
through. So I love the ritual of coffee in the morning. I make my kids breakfast every morning. I love cooking it, but like my body can't catch up to digest until about midday.
The best dessert.
Souffle or Kaiserschmarren.
Yeah, we went over that. It's great.
I mean, I was going to say
Sherry
souffle,
Yard
but then I was
shouts.
like, Kaiserschmarren's like a version of it, but it's like so specific. And honestly, no one makes it like she does. There's something voodoo in her recipe. And it is, again, one of those like, when you die, you will think about, on your deathbed, you will think about that dessert that haunts you in a good way.
Let's get Sherry on the show.
It's that. You really should.
Yeah, it'll happen. A restaurant you wish you could bring back from the dead.
Oh my God. There are so many.
Yeah.
I mean, we collect signed menus. So we have menus from experiences, restaurants we've opened, and places all over the world, and we have them signed by the chefs and teams, and then we specifically frame each one as sort of its own piece of art. And there's so many that are dead stock now, which is really disturbing. Like I said, I think a lot about the original Spago up on the hill. I loved Alma downtown. I really think he's
cool
a very
place.
talented chef. I miss the old days of Del Anima, like to my core. And actually, this is apropos because of this week. And I just sent my buddy Rich Teresi a text. We were original diners before anyone was going there, when the dining room was empty, before Jeff joined the group, before Sam wrote the review.
Teresi
The
Italian
original
Specialties.
Teresi. I'm turning 40 this year. I told him many years ago, when I'm 40, I'm going to make you recreate that. I will dream. And I love the new one. And the fact that Sam wrote this review, it is like a homecoming, a full circle. And seeing Rich come to this new higher level place in his cooking and his craft, just as his friend, I could wax poetic about it forever. But that was like the seedling of something that had never been done in this city. And frankly, I think in restaurants before. It's a big inspiration of what I was trying to do at Westbourne. And that moment in time, that place, that food, Rich and Mario, day one when they were just
The Polio
effing
mozzarella, the Maz, that dish they did where they're like tribute to the Polio. Such a good dish. The Rich interview is great. I'll link to the show notes. He goes over some of that history that you're talking about.
He's special.
Favorite city outside America to visit for food?
Oof. And I definitely Tokyo or Rome, in equal measure.
Wow. I love those choices.
That's it. Those are the two. I would say California, Tokyo, Rome are my biggest culinary influences by far.
When you go to Rome, what do you do? What's your move?
We studied abroad there. I met my husband the year before in college. We were children on like a faux honeymoon in Rome. Oh my God. I still love cul-de-sac. I don't know. There's just like something about that wine bar because that's where we used to always go. I loved a Cesare, big time.
Big time.
Jason Pfeiffer and the Maialino team, he's a good friend of mine. I spent a lot. That was the only restaurant that let me cook on the line, like legit. And I like love them for it. And I was like, I can't believe you're just throwing me on the pasta line. They're like, you seem fine. And it's so crazy there. They're like, we could use the extra hand.
Yeah.
So I always love that experience. And we always sort of rotate all of our Rome notes as things get updated. Of course, Piperno in the Jewish ghetto. I think the thing that I love about Rome is there's always something new, but it's also a city that really doesn't change. And that, again, it goes to that professionalization of an industry that I think is revered, that I think is appreciated, that I think is lucrative and has value both culturally and monetarily, that you see it in the restaurant culture. They stay there. They stay the same in a good way. The quality remains high. It's not seeking trends. It's not cutting costs. It's not value engineering. It is a staple as much as the historical monuments. And I think that's what draws me back to Rome so much.
Last one, your favorite sandwich?
I still dream about the mush Reuben from Westbourne. I won't lie. That I think is still one of the OG. I still miss it myself. I still make it. And that's a dish I would bring back in a partnership. It slapped.
Camilla Marcus, you're going to be back. We're going to talk about your hotel. We're going to talk about your book more. Thank you so much for joining This Is Taste.
Thank you for having me. Such a pleasure.
This Is Taste is hosted and produced by Eliza Barbanel and me, Matt Rodbard. The show is edited by lead producer Clayton Gumbert and supervised by Pat Stango, Director of Media Production and Development at Penguin Random House. Thanks to Shalia Harris and the production team at Penguin Random House. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Logo and guest illustrations by Ellie Skurzat. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter to keep updated on all cool things in the world of taste.